Welcome. My name is Bob Steele, and I'm a board member of the Aspen Institute, and it's my pleasure on behalf of the Aspen Institute and the Tisch family this evening to celebrate and welcome all of you here for the third annual Robert Tisch Award in Civic Leadership. The Aspen Institute is a nonpartisan forum where we try to bring leaders together to think and talk about the critical issues of the day. One of the key missions that we've identified that we try hard to think and speak about is the important role of leadership based on enduring values. And that indeed is why we're here tonight and why our mission fits so well, we hope, with this award. If you'd like to learn more about the Institute, we'll have a program and a copy of our magazine outside for you when you leave. Now let's turn to this evening. Tonight, this award and an ongoing discussion series on leadership were established several years ago by Bob Tisch's children, Laurie, Jonathan, and Steve, to honor the legacy of their father, Bob Tisch. Many people in this room remember Bob. Among many other things, he was a business leader, a compassionate and visionary philanthropist, a public servant, and a complete sports fan. And in many ways, he embodied a lot of the things that we think about for this great city, which he cared so much about, and the vibrancy of both are a good image as we think about Bob and New York City. We hope you'll find the same as the evening progresses about tonight's honoree, who's the third recipient of this award, the first two being Wynton Marsalis and Billie Jean King. Now, Laurie is going to come in a minute to introduce you to Danny Meyer, but I wanted to take a second personally just to tell you how excited I am to listen to Danny and Walter have their conversation this evening. You know, I know Danny a bit, and I've read his book, Setting the Table, and I thought that the two things that made such great impressions on me were, number one, the curiosity and passion that he brings to everything he does, and secondly, and something that we can all learn from every day, is respect for people, whether they're customers or colleagues in the business. It's something that just characterizes everything about him. So before we move on, let me first ask all of us to join and thank Laurie, Steve, John, and Lizzie Tisch for their generous support of the program. Laurie, John, and Lizzie are here tonight, so please join me in thanking them. So now it's my last honor to be able to invite Laurie to come up, who's dedicated so much energy and time and creativity to this project, as well as to many of the other innovative and important works of her foundation, following in many ways in the footsteps of her dad. The Laurie M. Tisch Illumination Fund is at work in many ways to improve the lives of people of this city, and also a strong and important member of the Aspen Institute Board of Trustees. Laurie, thank you for all the work that you do.
Thanks, Bob, or should I say, Chairman. I generally don't override deputy mayors, but Bob neglected to mention that he is not just a board member, but is really a tremendous chairman and leader of the Aspen Institute. So thanks so much to my friends and colleagues from the Aspen Institute, Bob Steele for his lovely introduction, and for Walter Isaacson for leading tonight's conversation. Thank you also to MoMA's President Glenn Lowry and their board and staff for hosting us this evening at MoMA. Many of you know that MoMA holds such a special place in our family's hearts, both for my late father and for my mother, who's been a longtime trustee. So it's really so fitting and meaningful for us to be here. As Bob said, this is a family project, and I'd like to recognize my brother John, my brother Steve, who I think is going over coaching plans. I don't know. I don't quite understand them, but I saw something about R, 3, G, and big X's across it. So let's just say he's doing God's work. And my sister-in-law, Lizzie. We're truly thrilled that all of you are here tonight to join us for tonight's presentation of the President Robert Tisch Award in Civic Leadership. And as always, a big and really heartfelt shout out to the staff of the Aspen Institute and to my staff at the Illumination Fund, Rick, Emily, and Jen, for pulling this evening together with such speed, professionalism, and always good humor. My family and I created this series with the Aspen Institute as a meaningful way to honor our father's legacy through an active discussion of the most pressing issues affecting the nation, the region, and our city. It's so appropriate that this award is presented to an individual who has made such a positive impact on his community and embodies the Aspen Institute ideas of value-based leadership. As Bob mentioned, our first winner, Civic Leader winner, was Wynton Marsalis, and last year's recipient was Billie Jean King. And it's been really a privilege and an honor to see how these inspiring and talented civic leaders share all the remarkable work that they do in their communities. Now, when it comes to tonight's recipient, I really can't think of a person who better exemplifies these qualities that my friend Corby Coomer referred to in a recent Atlantic article as, and I quote, among the country's most successful restaurateurs. More important than successful, he's a model for how others want to run their business. Thanks, Corby. Danny Meyer is truly the perfect candidate for this award, personifying the attributes that made our father, Preston Robert Tisch, a leader in the fields of public service, business, the hospitality industry, philanthropy, professional sports, and as so many of you know, just an all-around great guy. Similar to our upbringing, Danny was surrounded by a family that relished great food, travel, and hospitality. Well, actually, that's not completely true. Our exposure to great food was more like Stouffer's TV dinners with the chicken, the mashed potatoes, and the peas. But we were told it was really good and somehow believed it. Happily, with thanks to Danny and others, our taste buds have become quite a bit more discerning and sophisticated. Today, Danny is CEO of Union Square Hospitality, which includes some of New York's favorite restaurants, Union Square Cafe, Gramercy Tavern, Blue Smoke, Jazz Standard, Shake Shack, and of course, Moma's the Modern. While Danny's restaurants and chefs have earned an impressive 24 James Beards Awards, a big part of his contribution to New York is his role as a national leader in the fight against hunger, a critical issue that is ever so timely, and also an area of great passion that we at the Loriam Tisch Illumination Foundation are also very much involved in. Danny has long served on the boards of Share Our Strength and City Harvest, so I'm so honored to give our friend and Share Our Strength a gift of $25,000 to help support hunger and poverty relief in New York. I'd also just like to take a minute to recognize and congratulate Billy sorry. Sorry, I spent too many years on the Whitney board and know about Leonard Lauder's 3-minute rule, so I'm racing. I'd like to take a minute to also recognize Billy Shore, Executive Director and founder of Share Our Strength. And I really want to commend Share Our Strength on their always remarkable and vital work to end childhood hunger, but especially now as you've gathered your forces with such timely and powerful response to Hurricane Sandy. So Billy and Josh, congratulations. Danny has also been extremely active in community building, having served as the co-chair of the Union Square Partnership and on the executive committees of the New York City and Company and the Madison Square Park Conservancy. Upon receiving the 2010 National Restaurant Association Humanitarian Award, Danny expressed his leadership philosophy very simply: it's your responsibility to feed the community that feeds you. And boy, Danny, do you ever. In honor of his unique leadership and commitment to food access and healthier lives in New York, my family and I are honored and pleased to present the 2012 Preston Robert Tisch Award to our great friend and source of continued awe and inspiration, but never Stouffer's frozen dinner, Danny Meyer. Or maybe that's where you got your start. It is. Congratulations.
Really, the only difference is that we had Swanson's frozen dinners at our house. And we did. We had Stouffer's too, which was a great motivation to go on and try to serve something different. But Lori and John and Steve and Lizzie and wherever the rest of the Tisch family is right now. This is an enormous honor. I have been a huge admirer of your family, not only since the time I've lived in New York. I've told John this story, but when our family used to take spring vacations down in Miami Beach from St. Louis, I remember that my mom and dad would always point to this hotel, this big hotel, the Americana, and say, "That's the Tisch family from New York." And it didn't mean anything to me till I got to Camp Nebagaman, and I met the cousins of the Tisch family from New York. And somehow we have really had a mutual admiration society, and it's your civic leadership in what's wrong that needs to be fixed in New York, as well as what's right that needs to be promoted about New York, that really is a great source of pride and inspiration. And I also want to thank all of you for coming out here tonight. This is it's a big honor for me, and the biggest honor is what I get to do right now, is to hear questions from a guy who wrote the best book I read all year. So thank you very, very much, all of you.
Thank you very much. Great. Well, I'm Walter Isaacson, and thank you all for being here. We're going to start with the hurricanes, and but before I do, let me give a shout out to Bob Steele, because when it comes to leadership of the hurricanes, thank you. And after we had our hurricane in New Orleans, Katrina, you came down, if I remember correctly, with Billy Shore, and I think Corby Kummer was with you. And one of the things that happened was the restaurants were the first ones to come back, Joanne Clevenger of Upper Line and others. What did you learn when you went down to New Orleans after the storm about community and leadership?
I learned an important lesson from Billy Shore a long time ago, that it's one thing to write a check, which some of us are fortunate to be able to do when you see something that you want to address. But until you actually bear witness to feel what the people who you're trying to help are feeling, you're not going to be empathetic enough to really know what to do. And then secondly, what I learned in New Orleans, and you see this time and time again, whenever you see the worst things that happen in life, whether it's human-driven or nature-driven, is that there's always a person or an organization that is almost like this green sprout that just appears, that wants to do something about it, that is effective about doing. And so when I went to New Orleans, as horrible as the images were of, I wasn't there till several months after Katrina, and there were still cars piled on top of cars and big red X's all over homes, which you can still see today. But the thing that really moved me more than anything were the people like Joanne Clevenger, and the people who were selling Gulf shrimp, and the people who were, despite the fact that all their boats had been blocked from going out to the sea, or to the Gulf rather. And when you saw, one by one, citizens picking themselves up and trying to bring light and hope, and I've got to give a shout out to the restaurant industry, because those who could open understood that restaurants performed a really critical role, because they suggested that life was going to go on, and that life could go on, and not just as employers, and not just as people who purchase food and who purchase other things that help the economy, but they showed the city that there's life and there's light, and now we have our own version of that here in New York, and we have a lot of work to do well beyond Manhattan at this point.
How did those lessons play out in Sandy for you?
The lessons played out because we were part of the people hit by it, and we understood that, as I tried to tell Corby when he and I spoke on the phone last week, that as much as the first instinct was to go help people, that until we helped ourselves, we couldn't do that. And it's what we call the oxygen mask theory. I never understood when I was a kid why the flight attendant would I always thought, take care of the kids first, but they said put the oxygen mask on yourself if you're an adult, and then take care of your kid. And we learned that here. We had 1,000 employees who couldn't go to work for a week, and we had 6 restaurants that couldn't open for a week. And we had one business that didn't get its gas till last week. So as much as we wanted to reach out and help others, the first thing we had to do was to take care of our own team and take care of our own business so that we could work from a position of strength. But there were also a huge number of people on our team who had not been hurt. They lived in a part of town that had electricity. They could get to work without having to take a subway. And they got their restaurants open within 36 hours in some cases. And they wanted to do something immediately. So what we did, and we learned this lesson from Katrina also, was let it happen organically. If somebody wanted to go help by rolling up their sleeves and helping people clear out a demolished house in the Rockaways, let them do that. Shake Shack wanted to go raise money for the Red Cross, and they did. They raised $13,000 in 1 week. Let them go do that. If Gramercy Tavern wanted to go cook in Staten Island, let them go do that. But what we also learned, and I credit Billy Shore with this lesson, is that time and time again when these natural disasters happen, we saw this here, which wasn't a natural disaster with 9/11, it's the period of time minimally 3 weeks afterwards, and we're in that, we're right in that zone right now where you start to see the crisis recede from the newspapers, from the front pages of the newspapers, and you're not having thousands of people writing a check to the Red Cross.
The donor fatigue sets in.
And that's when the help really needs to start. And so Bob Steele and one of his associates, Rob Walsh, who's the Commissioner of Small Business in New York City, are being incredibly helpful to help point out how does the city look long term, and where can we use the strength of a healthy organization, which we are now, we're back open everywhere, to go help the community from this point.
You were able, because of the strength of your business, actually to keep your managers, your core staff paid, even though you weren't open. Is that right?
It's right and not right.
Yeah.
We were able to keep anyone who was on salary paid, and hourly workers were not working the hours. So what we did, which was it was a hard thing to do, but it was even harder to see people who depend, in many cases, waiters or hosts or hostesses or reservationists, who depend upon their hourly paycheck, the porter, the dishwasher, from day to day to make ends meet. And so what we did was to say that if anybody missed as many as 3 shifts, that we would write a one-time check to them and accompany that with their paycheck. And it was the right thing to do. We knew that any one of those checks was not enough probably to fill in that extra amount that they had lost, but it was deeply appreciated by people.
One of the things that's part of your leadership style is you do, as you said, empower, decentralize power, allow your great managers, great chefs and proprietors to exercise power. Tell me how that style has worked for you.
Well, it's evolved over the years. For the first 10 years of my career, there was one restaurant called Union Square Cafe. And I would say that my leadership style was pretty close to monkey see, monkey do. Yeah. I wasn't teaching anyone anything. I wasn't explicitly telling anyone what I expected. I just modeled it too many hours a day and hoped people would see how I wanted to do things. And it really wasn't until opening a second restaurant, Gramercy Tavern, nearly a decade later, that I realized that you had to be explicit about what you expected. You couldn't expect people to be mind readers. And as soon as there were 2 restaurants, obviously if you do the math, you realize as soon as I was at one, there was another one I wasn't at. And then all of a sudden there were 4 restaurants with 11 Madison Park and Tabla. So now wherever I am, I'm not at 3 others. And over time, and I would say that the Modern at the Museum of Modern Art here was probably the tipping point for me, because we doubled the size of our company in terms of employees by opening in this museum, because we have the Modern, We have Cafe 2, Terrace 5, Staff Caf, because we do the cafeteria for the staff of the Museum of Modern Art. And I had to laugh at a certain point because I said to myself, this is the greatest cure for being a wannabe control freak that you can imagine, because there is so much more here than I could touch even if I wanted to, that this is the moment that I have to realize, hire people who share a philosophy about how to do business, the spirit of how to do business, but hire people who are better at all the things they do than I ever could have been. And then as long as we agree on the spirit of the endeavor, let them go with it.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things you share with Bob Tisch, you know, who this award is named after, is a belief that with success comes community involvement, that to throw yourself into a community. The way some restaurateurs over the years have done, maybe Joe Baum or whatever, but not many. Why do you feel it's so important to be a community person, not just a restaurateur?
I wish I could say that I had an intellectual answer to that. I think it's in my blood. I was a child of the Midwest, but I think more importantly, on both sides of my family, I had civic leaders. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons this award is as meaningful as it is to me is that my late grandfather, Irving Harris, who lived in Chicago, if I had a dollar for every time he mentioned the Aspen Institute to me growing up, I'd have almost as much money as he left me when he died.
Is Joan here?
Joan is here.
Joan, stand up for Joan Harris. Hey, there you are. Good to see you. Speaking of civic leaders in Chicago and Harris.
But, you know, I think my grandfather set an amazing example for the entire family, which was that he was a very successful businessman, but I would say that he probably dedicated the last quarter of his life to philanthropy and thinking
that
about...
That was a long quarter, too.
It was at the age of
90-something, right?
That's right. And then on the other side of my family, my paternal grandfather in St. Louis was very, very involved with the city. He took the leadership role in creating the flood wall to protect St. Louis from the Mississippi flood tides, working with the Army Corps of Engineers when that was still considered a very competent organization. And ran for public office. He was a staunch Republican. My other grandfather was a staunch Democrat, and I came out independent.
I love St. Louis. So what was it like growing up in St. Louis? We have that great diversity. You do have good food. You have the river, of course.
We had okay food.
Yeah.
We had in all honesty, we had, if you like Provel cheese on your pizza, which is the Velveeta version of mozzarella. We had really, really good food there. We did have some things food-wise which I've had fun playing with in various restaurants. Toasted ravioli, which we make homemade at Blue Smoke. We had frozen custard. We had Steak and Shake, and if you take that plus Fitz's root beer stand, you get Shake Shack. So there was some fun food aspects of St. Louis, but it was really the way you were treated in restaurants with open arms that I took from St. Louis. And by the time I got to New York, and also had a great opportunity to travel because of my father's travel business, I realized how much better the food could be elsewhere. But it seemed to me that in New York, at least when I moved here in the 1980s, 1981, the hospitality was completely missing. And so the easy answer was to pair the best of growing up in the Midwest, in St. Louis specifically, with what I was seeing here in New York. The other great thing about growing up in St. Louis, like this gentleman up here, I'm a huge sports fan, and I don't think there was a night between April and often October that I didn't fall asleep with Jack Buck and Harry Carey in my ear, listening to the St. Louis Cardinals, and then I'll fall asleep.
Harry Carey was the greatest announcer
except for his partner, Jack Buck, who was even better.
Really?
Yep.
You just mentioned something that to me is at the core of what you brought to New York, which is New York restaurants up until you came along didn't always feel welcoming and open arms. They felt clubby and sometimes intimidating, but you just couldn't feel like I can go in there and they'll treat me the way they would anybody else. To what extent, and you've been able to keep the sort of clubby feel, but make it open and embracing. To what extent is that the secret of your success in your restaurants?
About 110%.
Okay.
I think you just nailed it. It's a fascinating thing. When I first moved to New York, obviously nobody knew or cared who I was, and so I got treated in restaurants just the way everybody was getting treated who wasn't a somebody. And I think that the dining scene in New York, especially in the mid-1980s, was really the domain of restaurants that started with Le, La, and Il. And
right.
The Le and La were the French places because, and they definitely had the pecking order. And then in the Italian restaurants that wanted to be taken seriously to get the chip off their shoulder that they weren't cooking French food and that they were Italian, and I know how hard that sounds, but that's how it was, tried to pretend that they were French restaurants. And
True.
You don't go to Italy and find many restaurants that start with Il.
Right.
It's amazing, but all the ones in New York started with Il, and that was their way of saying, we can be French too. And I never got a good table, I never got a reservation at those restaurants. And I decided that what had been incredibly inspirational to me had been the time that, because of my dad's business, I got to spend as a tour guide in Rome, eating in trattorias, and I went back to school in Rome studying political science, trattorias, bistros of Paris. Increasingly, I was finding myself inspired by Berkeley and San Francisco. And so Union Square Cafe was a big, wide open, easy mark to hit, because it was a restaurant that could be inspired in some ways by the natural approach to going out and coming home as being one, which I found in trattorias.
Interesting.
It could embrace the green market in a way that Alice Waters certainly taught us all about out in Berkeley, but without being at all, dogmatic about it. It could be a party like we saw happening in Southern California that Wolfgang Puck did at Spago, but it could then add this element of hospitality to the whole thing. And so it was almost a synthesis for me of what I had seen growing up in St. Louis, excited by the West Coast, warmed by the food and the trattorias of Italy, and interested by what was going on in France.
What do you think the new food trends are coming down the pike?
I think the same thing of them that I've thought of every trend that has come and gone for the last 27 years. It will come and go. And the only thing that won't come and go is that people want to be well cared for in a restaurant. And I think that what's interesting today, if I were to, I can think of the first 5 years we were in business. The first year, mesquite grilling, 1985. The next year, architectural food presentations. The next year, it was vegetable reductions. Jean-Georges did. And then, you got into things like small plates and large plates and tapas and molecular gastronomy and foams and smearing sauces all over the plate. You've seen every single one of the trends, and the only thing that is different today is that we have never in our history had this confluence of food, which started off as a way to feed your brain so you could survive, and brains consume a lot of energy, to the point that food for human beings, unlike other animals, became something more, which was nutrition plus companionship, breaking bread together. And then it got into something even more important, where we are today, which is called entertainment. And the fact that food is everywhere, on the internet, on TV, and everybody wants to be a chef. I was embarrassed to tell my parents that I was going to go into the restaurant business. That's not why they sent me to a good school, but everyone wants to do it today. And what that means, because there's ultra competition to write about food, not just among journalists, but among everyone who tweets. There's ultra competition among everyone who owns a restaurant. There's competition among producers to produce the thing that's going to be the next thing. And there's competition amongst restaurant goers to be able to tell all their friends, check, I went to that one, did you? Check, I went to that one. And because of this hyper confluence of nutrition and companionship and entertainment and voyeurism, I would say, we are now seeing more contrived trends than you have ever seen in the history.
And how does social media exacerbate that?
Social media is basically like a huge gust of wind, so that an idea, good, bad, or other, 25 years ago, when I opened Union Square Cafe, you would have to work to discover the good idea. I would work like crazy to go find an off-the-beaten path restaurant in Italy that I could go to with my wife, Audrey, and we would get there before anyone had discovered this restaurant, and I would find 3 dishes, and I would bring them home to Michael Romano. I would hum the tune. He would play it better than I had it in Italy, and voila, we had a great 3 dishes on our menu that no one had ever seen in New York, and that and we had a 2-year running start before someone would copy it. Nowadays, there's no way I can get to that restaurant first because someone has been there, tweeted about it, written about it somehow, and even if I did get there and got the idea, someone else is cooking it somewhere else. So it's like taking seeds from a tree that used to only fall here in this vineyard unless somebody was smart enough or lucky enough to come from afar and discover it. And today, it's just everything's getting planted everywhere. And the question for all restaurants is it the right context? And the goal, I think, whether it's a menu or whether it's restaurant design, that we've always had is that I want you to come to one of our restaurants and look at it and smell it and taste it and meet the waiters and waitresses and say to yourself, if we do our job well, whether it's in a park or whether it's in a ballpark or whether it's in a museum, is to say, well, what else could they have done here? This is exactly what belonged in this context right here.
Let me mention a trend that might be more than a trend, something that you've been involved with, and ask if that's true, which is the local cooking and market. That's certainly when you were growing up in St. Louis, that was not the way it was. Is that something real and valid, or is that just a trend that will come and go?
I remember our idea of fresh local food on Friday was Mrs. Paul's fish sticks in my house growing up. Sorry, Mom, but I never liked those, and I tried to tell you that. But, of all the different types of trends, I would not put locavore eating in the category of being a trend. I think that is here to stay because there's no way once you've eaten something that tastes as good as it can taste when it's that well cared for, that well grown, and that recently picked, you're not going to go back. And I don't view that as a trend. I think the manipulation of what was well produced and what grew is a trend, and I think that, and I hope that when this one comes and goes, people realize that there's really only one reason for a restaurant, and that's to allow one or more people take a moment and feel better than they would have felt if they hadn't gone there in the first place. And sometimes the trends today are especially obnoxious because these 18-course tasting menus, which
You're
means...
talking about 11 Madison Park?
Well, I'm not actually...
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's actually not what I was thinking about. But thanks for the allusion. But...
I'm sorry, go back to 11-course tasting menus.
No, I said 18. You said 11.
Right.
I didn't bring that number into the conversation. But I just think that when you go to eat with somebody, you don't want to spend your whole time being interrupted. I went to a restaurant, which I love 11 Madison Park for the record, okay? And I'm proud of 11 Madison Park. But I went to another restaurant recently where I saw something that I thought I would never see in my life. First of all, 5 of the first 6 courses came with instructions on how to eat it. And on the 7th course, the server came by with a laptop computer, and you'll be happy to know it was an Apple. And they gave us a film clip of how the person had harvested the wheat that was going into the pasta.
This sounds like a Saturday Night Live parody of a restaurant. Well, all right. Speaking of bad mistakes like that, have you made any bad mistakes that you've learned, or mistakes that you've learned from? Well, in the past hour or two, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, what mistakes have you learned from?
Oh my gosh, so many. I think the biggest mistakes. I have a really big problem, which is that I have a sticky thing somewhere in my brain that remembers every single mistake we've ever made. I promise you, today I was looking at my group of emails, and I saw a name on the email, and as soon as I saw the name, I didn't remember how I knew the person. I didn't remember the story, but I remembered, that came out of the mistake file.
Yeah.
And it was someone who was writing back to say, I'm teaching my son a lesson that it's worth giving a business a second chance, so we're going to come back. And there it was reminding me, that was we make those kind of mistakes all day. The food's too slow, the salmon's overcooked, the pasta's too al dente. We make those mistakes all day. But the worst mistakes I think we make, and I bet we make them every single day, is a mistake where someone who works for us feels like we did something to them and not something for them. And we think that hospitality that we offer our guests will never and can never rise to a higher level than the way our own team feels. And we do it all the time, and we generally make those mistakes by not communicating the right thing at the right time to the right person. We don't communicate the context with which a decision is being made. We don't let people know what's coming down the road, so they get blindsided by it. And every single time we make one of those mistakes, sometimes in business you can't say everything to everybody all the time, because there are aspects of business that you're working on, and until they're developed, it's almost irresponsible to tell people. But the biggest mistakes that I make, and that I think our organization makes, is when we don't communicate and let people know what's coming down the pike.
I'm going to ask my last question, which is a very biographer's question, which is, what did you learn from both the successes and failures of your father?
I'll start with the failure so I can end on a high note. We all are human and we all fail, and the biggest lesson I think I've learned, actually I'll start with a positive, then I'll go to the failure, and then I'll end with another positive. But in failure, there is just as much learning as there is in success. And I think that from the time someone's an infant to the time they're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, you really, really look up to your parents in a way that isn't fair to them, because no parent is a god. And my dad was my best friend when I was a kid. We shared interests together: sports, cooking, travel, and so it was a very, very hard thing for me to see him fail twice in his business. He was an entrepreneur who came up with all kinds of amazing ideas. He was a great writer, and he had a good work ethic. But the biggest thing that I saw, but I didn't understand it at the time, was that each time he expanded his company, he did it in a way that it got out of his control. And it got out of his control because he tended to bite off more than he could chew. But the real thing he did was that he wasn't surrounding himself with the kind of complementary talents that would have allowed him to grow in a safe way. And so it took me a long time to figure that out. And that's why it took me 10 years to open a second restaurant. And in fact, I didn't open a second restaurant until after he had died, because I was afraid that expansion equaled bankruptcy. And it took a lot of learning and self-awareness to figure out that it could be done in a very responsible way, and that that I think I've always overcompensated by trying to hire people and surround myself with people who know how to do all kinds of things that I don't know how to do. And I don't hire people for the purpose of making me feel important. So that was probably the biggest failure. And I think the biggest success was teaching me that the pursuit of hedonism, and I use that word in a very proud way, fine wine, good food, not fancy food, but good food, warm hospitality, beautifully done hotels, learning languages. My dad was a linguist. I've learned 3 languages, and I'm proud of that because it's opened all kinds of new worlds to me and new cultures to me. And an openness to taking those things he loved and a desire to share what he loved with other people and to bring his enthusiasm to others as a gift. That's the greatest gift, and I hope I do that.
Great. Let me open it up for a few questions. I'm going to start with Corby, if I may, because Corby's got been writing about you in theatlantic.com and other things. Corby Kummer is the food critic of The Atlantic.
So thank you very much, Walter. So, I think you're much too modest to say that you've created a brand. And a lot of us, our default assumption when we really want to go out for a special occasion isn't so much to say, let's go to X restaurant, but let's go to a Danny Meyer restaurant. I've been saying that for years, and lots of people I know have been saying that for years. So it's sort of the Danny Meyer brand. How did you set out to create that with Shake Shack? And if you could change how service is in other fast food places, how would you change that as exemplified by what you've been able to do with Shake Shack, which, as everybody knows, is just incredibly successful, lines out the door whenever you see it?
Well, I didn't thank you for the nice embedded compliment in your question. I didn't set out to create a brand to start with. I set out to get this itch out of my system, which is on the eve of thinking I was going to be a lawyer so that I might one day get involved with politics. It became painfully obvious to me that I had no interest whatsoever in being a lawyer, and if it weren't for going out to dinner that night with a very provocative uncle who said, "What the hell are you going to waste your life going into law for when you're going to be dead forever?" And otherwise,
Lawyers in the audience will take comfort.
no problem with lawyers. Just I wouldn't want to be one myself. But so it was never about. It was about I've got to get this out of my system. I'm gonna try my hand at a restaurant, and I'll either like it or I'll hate it. I'll be okay at it or I won't be. But there was never any sense that there would be more than one restaurant. That's for sure. And so, as a matter of fact, the only reason that the name Union Square Hospitality Group ever came to the fore was that after opening Gramercy Tavern with Tom Colicchio 10 years after Union Square Cafe, I got tired of saying from the same people that brought you Union Square Cafe, and I didn't want to put my name on it. So I had always said the second one better be as good as the first, and it better feel as good. So it was Union Square Hospitality. I know a group isn't until you get to 3, but yeah, there you had it. As far as Shake Shack is concerned, Shake Shack started off as a hot dog cart in Madison Square Park as part of an art program with the Public Art Fund. And an artist from Thailand had been commissioned by the Public Art Fund to do something called I Heart Taxi in Madison Square Park. And he said he needed to have a hot dog cart to go with his taxi exhibit. Why? Because his political statement was that the only 2 truly democratic things in the entire world are taxi cabs and hot dog carts. Because everyone in the world has either been the guy who could afford to drive in the taxi or the guy who had to drive it. And everyone in the world has either been able to afford to buy a hot dog or had to be the guy who had to sell it. And they needed someone to operate it. And it was the summer of 2001, right before 9/11. And we said, we'll do it. We put all of our coat checkers from 11 Madison Park to work because they weren't going to have a job till the weather got cold. And we said, if we're going to do a hot dog cart, we could test out our whole hospitality concept on something so mundane. So we did Chicago-style hot dogs, homemade beet-stained potato chips, and homemade lemon verbena iced tea. That's all we had on the menu. And the idea was, what if we could take something as mundane as a hot dog cart, but you take a Chicago hot dog with its 9 toppings, and what if we could prove that hospitality could actually work at a hot dog cart? We will remember that you're the guy who likes everything but sport peppers, and you're the guy that likes everything but neon relish, and you're the woman who likes everything but mustard. And lo and behold, we would get 60 and 70 and 80 people waiting in line for this hot dog. Dan Rather covered it. Peter Jennings covered it. Tom Brokaw covered it. Aaron Brown on CNN covered it. The show went away, and next summer, the hot dog cart still existed, and they said, please strip the artist's caulking off the end of it and do the hot dog cart again. So we did it. First year we lost $20,000. The second year we lost $30,000 because we were staffing a hot dog cart with 3 people. No one ever done that. We did it for a third year, and we said, we're going to get smart. In the third year, we're going to announce that we're going to donate all of our profits this year to the Madison Square Park Conservancy. And we figured, hey, we have nothing to lose. We've been... So in year 3, we made $7,500. And that was the year that the Madison Square Park Conservancy asked us if we would go along with them to put in a bid with the city of New York to do a permanent kiosk. And what we decided to do, I got out a piece of paper and a pencil. We still have it hanging in the office. I think the menu for Shake Shack was written literally in 2.5 minutes. And the rest is history.
Just one.
Sure.
How can we all help restaurants in the food business that have been affected by Hurricane Sandy? Some advice.
That's a great question. I would offer 2 pieces of hope and advice. Number one is that there's a great deal of attention being paid to the restaurants that are out of business. And I would try to pay attention to the restaurants that are in business. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I would try to pay attention to those restaurants that are in business and who are offering support to those restaurants who are out of business. Because you can't, unless you plan to go in with your hammer and nails, as our team did in New Orleans to help Dookie Chase get back open, you can't really do too much right now as an individual for a restaurant that's out of business. But we're starting to look at ways that healthy restaurants can help restaurants that are less healthy. We're thinking about things like adopting restaurants. We're thinking about things like how can you hire people who are out of work from the restaurants that are closed. But if the restaurants that lost a whole week, which is serious, especially at this time of year, or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, which are now open, are still teetering, I would make sure they get real strong before doing other things.
Yes, right here. Thank you, Otto.
Good evening. I'm Chris Gates, and Walter, I'm just having a great time with your book, so thank you so much for that. Danny, you're so much fun to root for. Really, back in the 1980s, you and I had dinner at a restaurant with our wives when they were both working for Gourmet magazine, and it just has been so much fun to see your success, and I'm sure I speak for everyone in the room when I say that.
Actually, there's someone back there who doesn't like me very much.
Okay, got it. There's a wonderful drift to what you're up to. In other words, you can just sort of project out what probably almost certainly is apt to happen in terms of just the continued success and growth in your business. My question is, what for you would be an absolute breakthrough? In other words, what is the unpredictable, out-of-the-box, blow your mind kind of development that might happen over the next couple of years as you imagine it?
Are you talking about in life in New York City or in our business? I'm not clear.
Well, I would say, perhaps in your business, and to a certain extent, obviously that's indicative of what's possible here in New York.
I think that we think a lot these days about what we call Gen Next in our company. There's a heck of a lot of people who have been with us for as many as 20 years who are, believe it or not, just turning 40. And they are, we've seen so many of them actually leave the business over the last 5 years to go open terrific restaurants, largely in Brooklyn, which is why I'm there almost once a week eating, because I love it so much. But I think the biggest breakthrough for us would be to say, if you love what you've learned in our company, why do you have to leave in order to go do your own thing? And so I think one of the great breakthroughs for us is when this Gen Next is empowered even more than we've done so far, where we almost become not their boss, but I'd like to go from being someone's dad to being their great uncle. You know, where I get to do all the rooting and I care just as much, but I'm not the guy assigning them their homework.
Yes. Way in the middle there. Keep our mic. Oh, sorry. There's a hand I saw.
Hi, my name is Carlo Romero. Danny, thank you for joining us this evening. I think in New York, and especially in this room, we're very fortunate to be able to talk about 18-course meals and the locavore movement. But outside of New York, there's this concept of food deserts, where a lot of people don't have access to healthy food, or it's not affordable. And I was wondering if you could talk about a possible solution to that. Obviously, you know, health is a big issue in this country, and I can't say that we're heading in the right direction, and you're obviously somebody who's been very successful in the food industry. What do you think we could do to address this issue of food deserts in the country?
I'm glad you asked the question, because I was completely baffled when I read a few months ago somebody apparently very authoritative saying there's no such thing as a food desert. I don't know if anyone saw that, but our group has had experience with two things that I think could be very, very helpful, but you know, it takes a lot of people and a lot of movements to make this type of thing actually go somewhere. City Harvest here in New York is involved with two different programs that I would urge you, since you're obviously interested in this, to get involved with. One is their mobile markets, which is where they take food that is leftover food and or additional food from wholesalers, fresh, completely healthy, and they bring that into these neighborhoods that don't have green markets, farmers markets. They may not even have a supermarket. And in exchange for vouchers, which City Harvest hands out to the people who might live in a public housing project or who might just live in that neighborhood, they are able to have a certain amount of poundage of food of their choice. And so people on our team at Union Square Hospitality Group have served at City Harvest Mobile Market. It's a great experience to do it, and I'm proud of City Harvest for doing that. Finally, City Harvest, working in conjunction with Share Our Strength, which you heard Walter and Bob Steele talking about earlier, operates a program called Cooking Matters. And what Cooking Matters is, in a nutshell, it's kind of like a 21st century version of home ec, which doesn't exist in schools anymore, but it's basically saying, what if either through your food stamps or through whatever limited funds you have to spend on food, what if using the exact same amount of funds, we could teach you how to take a whole chicken and butcher it and make really good food with it, as opposed to buying something processed that's going to not give you the kind of calories that are nutritious. And I'm using chicken as one example, because Cooking Matters teaches people all kinds of ways to make their dollar much more useful than paying food that's not good for you.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, Laurie does that quite a bit with her fresh food stands, which thank you. Yes, I'm sorry, was there back there? Or, right up here up front, sorry, I thought, yes.
Hi. I wanted to draw a different connection between leadership and restaurants, which is that many times leadership is conveyed in its most intimate way over meals. And I'm actually thinking personally of one of my leaders, Michael Romano's sister Juliet, who has taken me out to dinner many times, and I've learned a lot from her. And I was wondering if you think that your model of leadership in any way has rubbed off on the customers you've had who are leaders and are bringing their employees or whoever else out for a meal.
New York has become
All right,
a more
next question.
hospitable place. Yeah.
It's a hard thing for me to answer that because I think that you'd have to ask other people rather than me. What I can tell you is that we just started a company a year and a half ago called Hospitality Quotient. And as a matter of fact, we're in the process of having a 3-day class right now. And most of the people we work with are not in the restaurant business. We've worked with major hospitals across the country, many of whom have been our regular guests who asked us to come in. We've worked with the city of New York. We've worked with supermarket chains. We've worked with rental car companies. We've worked with retailers that are household names. And mostly the way we've met the people who take these hospitality quotient classes or ask us to do something custom is they say, look, we don't want you to teach us, because you couldn't if you wanted to, anything about the stuff we do. We're already the best in the world at what we do. But we would love to find a way to add this extra element that makes your restaurants feel different than other restaurants. And I'm implying to myself that most of the leads we've gotten for Hospitality Quotient, the company, have come from people who we first met when they came to the restaurant. So perhaps you're onto something.
Mm-hmm. Right there, we'll make this the last question. Yes.
Danny, first I'm going to say thank you, because 20 years ago I had an experience in Union Square Cafe, and it was one of the primary reasons why I've been in the restaurant industry for about 22 years now.
Wow.
So thank you very much. My question is there any consistency or a reoccurring pattern when you wake up in the morning and walk into the bathroom and look at yourself in the mirror and say something to yourself to get yourself going and doing all the great things that you do both in the restaurant career and in your civic leadership?
Do you realize you have inspired the best and most unusual questions I've ever had in my life?
Right. Usually people ask you, 16-ounce drinks and salt or something, right?
It's funny you asked that question, because just yesterday, as I was looking at myself in the mirror, I thought about something that one of my great mentors, who happens to be sitting 2 people to your left, if my eyesight is correct, told me, which is the most precious time of day is your shaving time. Now, I don't know if you women out here want to be taking me up on this, but it is my favorite moment, and I think about it almost every day after I'm done shaving, because I get into a meditative mode, because, guys, if you've been doing it for a number of years, there's really not that much to think about except don't shave sideways. That's the one thing you want to think about. And I have some of my best thinking. I'm not looking at myself and going, "Oh, you beautiful doll." That's never happened. But it's truly the best time of meditating for the whole day for me.
I'm going to end with an exhortation that you can respond to if you want, which is, as a civic leader, I have a theory about Washington, the city where we're actually headquartered, which is it used to be there were great old restaurants like Duke Zebert's that were almost like Union Square Hospitality Group places that were friendly and embracing, and Democrats and Republicans would all go there and they'd have a good time and talk. And now Washington is not a city that has restaurants where people come together and just for the fun of it, just for the collegiality of it. So the exhortation is, why don't you open a restaurant in Washington? You could save the fiscal cliff problem just by bringing people together. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. Congratulations.